At 33, I spent every last dollar I had on a gas station my whole family called a grave. The morning I signed the papers, my mother looked me dead in the eye and told me I was throwing my life in a ditch. My father stood at the window with his back to me and said, "Real Rutledges build things. They don't go digging through other people's trash." My brother Wade leaned in the doorway, grinning, and called me what he'd always called me, a hopeless failure. They were gone before the ink was dry. 1 week later, I stood in the dark behind that dead convenience store, running my hand along a cheap wall somebody had built for one reason only, to make sure no one ever looked behind it. I knocked once. The wall knocked back wrong, hollow, and underneath it, cold air was breathing out through a seam, slow and steady, like the building had been holding something in for 40 years and was finally ready to exhale. What I found behind that wall didn't just change my life. It rewrote the one story my family had spent 90 years telling about itself. And the day I finally said it out loud, at my father's own gala, the whole room went silent. You have to understand what the name Rutledge meant in Calico Bend. My grandfather Amos showed up here in the 30s with nothing and ended up owning half the storefronts on Main. My father, Garrett, took that and built Rutledge Land and Holdings into the company that put up every subdivision and frontage road in the county for 3 decades. There's a Rutledge wing at the hospital, a Rutledge scholarship at the high school. When people said the name, they said it the way you say a landmark. I grew up understanding the name was a roof we all lived under, and the roof had rules. You did not embarrass it. You did not strike out on your own. You closed ranks. For 6 years I kept the books for my father's company, and I was good at it. I'm the kind of person who reads the fine print twice and then apologizes for taking up the room. Over-responsible, my old boss called it. I carry other people's mistakes around like rent I owe. Then came a land deal in 2019. A strip parcel off the county road. The numbers Wade wanted me to record didn't match the numbers that actually moved, and I flagged it. Twice. In writing. He told me I didn't understand how deals breathe. When the county came asking questions, the paperwork had my initials on it, and Wade's fingerprints nowhere. My father chose to believe his son. I didn't fight it the way I should have, because fighting your own family in public felt like setting fire to your own house. So I left. I hung my own shingle, Rutledge Bookkeeping, a one-woman shop on 2nd Street, and for 2 years, I did honest work for honest people. Then my biggest client filed bankruptcy, owing me 8 months of fees, and took my margins down with him. I closed the door in March. So when a man named Dale Mercer slid into my booth at the diner and told me about a property nobody wanted, cheap enough that a woman with $84 and a ruined name could own it free and clear, I listened. I should have asked why he was so eager to help, but I had no idea how bad it was about to get. Dale Mercer flips properties. He buys dead things cheap, paints over the rot, and sells them to people who don't look underneath. He'd done a little work for my father over the years, which should have been my first warning. The old Howard Station, 10 minutes out on the dead highway, shut down since 1987. Asking price, $41,000. Land alone's worth more, he said. Owners are an estate back east. They just want it gone. It sounded too clean, and I knew it. So I did what I do. I pulled the title myself, read every transfer back to the 30s. Clear, no liens. I called the state about the underground tanks, pulled and certified clean in 91. I paid $200 I didn't have for a retired inspector named Pete, who said the bones were good and the roof was a liability. Everything checked, so I bought it. Every cent I'm mine. Amenting saved in 11 years, $41,000, for the only door my money could open. And when I told Dale I was paying cash and skipping his inspection contingency, he smiled too wide and said, "Smart girl, Then he stepped outside and made a phone call I couldn't hear. The first night I owned it, I went out alone with a flashlight and a thermos. 2 dead pumps out front, windows gone milky with dust. The smell hit me first. Old diesel soaked into concrete, and under it something chalky and damp, like wet lime sealed up and left to cure in the dark for 40 years. Behind the store there was a storage room, and the back wall had been finished in cheap 80s paneling. I ran my hand along it. Then, because I am the kind of person who can't leave a wrong number alone, I knocked. The front wall knocked back solid. The side wall, solid. The back wall sounded wrong. Hollow, but not the hollow of an empty stud bay. Deeper, and cold air was leaking out through a seam where the paneling met the floor. Steady, like the building was breathing out. I stood there a long time, $84 to my name, the whole town laughing at me, listening to a wall exhale on purpose. The next afternoon I came back with a crowbar. The first sheet of paneling came away with a shriek of old nails, and behind it there was no crawl space. There was a wall of poured concrete, smooth and deliberate, and set into it. A steel door, not a closet door, a heavy slab of riveted steel with a rotary bolt handle, the kind you'd see on a bank vault. Sealed shut, painted over, then walled in by somebody who wanted it forgotten. Somebody had hidden this twice, once behind concrete, then again behind paneling. That night I made a decision that would change everything. I didn't pry it open. I photographed it. I logged it. I went home and started reading. Because the only thing I trust more than a plan is a record. The county history told me the truth before the door ever did. The Howard Place wasn't built as a station. It went up in the early 1920s as a bonded warehouse, a building the federal government licensed to store goods under seal. And during Prohibition, a bonded warehouse was one of the only legal places liquor could exist. Distillery stock frozen by the law. When the conversion to a gas station happened in 1936, someone bricked up the old bonded room and built a store over the memory of it. I worked the painted bolt loose with penetrating oil, an inch at a time, until the handle turned with a groan that echoed down into something below. 12 stone steps. My flashlight in one hand, my phone recording in the other, because I wanted the first moment untouched. The smell opened up around me. Charred oak, slow rotting paper, the smell of things aging in the dark longer than I'd been alive. The cellar was bigger than the room above it. Stone walls, a vaulted brick ceiling, and racks, wooden racks running the whole length, and on them, rows of dark glass. Hundreds of bottles, wrapped in straw and brittle paper, packed in crates stamped with faded ink. I lifted one out. Hand-blown glass, sealed with wax over the cork. The label was spotted but legible. A bonded whiskey. The strip stamp still across the cap. A date in the corner that started with 19 and a 2. My hands stopped being steady. I've read enough to know what one bottle of authenticated, bonded, pre-repeal whiskey brings at auction. $1,000 is the low end. And I was standing in a stone room with rack after rack of them. 90 years sealed. The wax intact. I did not whoop. I did not call a soul. I sat down on the bottom step in the cold and dark, and I made myself breathe, because the math my brain was doing was so large I couldn't let myself believe it. But here's the thing my family never understood about me. The bottles weren't the win. Anybody can find old liquor in a wall, and half of it gets seized or smashed because nobody can prove what it is. The difference between a curiosity and a fortune is one word: provenance. Who made it? Who bonded it? Who owned it? An unbroken chain from then to the bottle in your hand. And that meant somewhere in that room there were papers. A bonded warehouse runs on records. I realized then, no one was coming to save me. I had to save myself. And for once, the thing I was good at was the exact thing the moment required. So instead of telling anyone, I spent 2 days being a bookkeeper. I photographed every crate, every stamp, every label, and logged them in a spreadsheet like inventory. I moved nothing I didn't have to. I found a fine spirits auction house in Denver that handled exactly this, and I emailed them, careful and plain, as the verified legal owner, asking what authentication would require. They wrote back within the hour. They were very, very interested, and what they wanted most was documentation tying the cash to the warehouse, because that, the appraiser wrote, was the difference between a good sale and a historic one. Documentation, so I went back down with new eyes. Not for the bottles now, for the room. And against the far wall, behind a desk bolted to the floor, set into the stone at knee height, was a small iron door I'd missed in the dark. It took an hour to work the hinge. Inside sat a brass-cornered strongbox, green with age, heavy as a sleeping cat. I carried it up and worked the latch, and it opened with a sigh of cold air, and the smell of paper kept dry. Inside were Aiden Howerin's records, a bonded manifest stamped 1924, a federal bond permit, and folded underneath, the two papers that mattered more than all the rest, a promissory note from 1931, and a bill of sale dated March of that year, the deed to this parcel, with Aiden Howerin on the seller's line. I read the buyer's name 3 times before it would hold still. Amos Rutledge. My grandfather. The man with nothing. Stapled behind it was a county foreclosure notice from 1933. And together, the papers told a story even my tired eyes could read. My grandfather hadn't bought this place. He'd loaned a drowning man money in the worst year of the Depression, at terms anyone today would call predatory, the full balance due in 90 days. When Howerin couldn't pay, Amos took the land, the building, and everything in it for the price of the debt. Everything in it. Except Amos never found the seller, because it was already sealed when he took the keys. And a man in a hurry to look respectable doesn't go knocking on his own walls. I sat there holding 90 years of my family's first lie, the fortune my father built his pride on, the name this whole town worshipped. It started right here, in the room my father had called other people's trash. A different woman might have driven straight to his kitchen table that night. I wanted to, but my family wins every fight that happens out loud and in the dark. So I did it by the book. I scanned every page, saved copies in 3 places, and locked the originals in a safe deposit box in a town where no Rutledge had ever set foot. They had no idea what was coming. They figured it out fast enough. Dale had seen the open paneling and the dark mouth of that steel door, and within days my parents were standing in my gravel lot with a casserole and an offer. A property like this, there are tax angles, liability angles, my father said, gentle as anything. We could fold it into holdings. Protect you on the paperwork. Protect me. 3 weeks ago, I was a hopeless failure digging through trash. I told him I was fine on the paperwork. It was the one thing I'd always been good at. Then came Wade, in his good boots, talking about a moral question, about how I'd be selling off Rutledge ground. And finally my father came alone, an old man against an orange sky, almost soft for a moment, afraid, I think, of being a stranger in the town he'd built, until he closed it himself. You'll stand up at the gala, he said, and say the family's handling it together, or you'll find out how short a Rutledge's memory of you can be. The Founders' Day Gala. My father was being named Citizen of the Year, and the trap was simple. He'd hand me a microphone in front of 200 people, and the press, and I'd have no graceful way to say no without looking exactly like the grasping, confused girl they'd spent a month describing. It was a good trap, I'll give them that. So the night before, I didn't write a speech. My family's power was always noise. If I walked in there to outshout them, I'd lose on their court. I prepared an envelope instead, the recorded deed, the signed auction consignment in my name, a lawyer's title opinion, and the 1931 bill of sale stapled to the 1933 foreclosure, with Amos Rutledge's signature where everyone could see it. The Elks Hall filled with 200 chairs, the mayor, the newspaper, and 3 tables back, a man in a quiet gray suit with a leather folio, the representative the auction house had sent, exactly as I'd asked them to, in writing. My father worked the room like the king he'd always been. When they handed him the plaque, the whole town rose. Then his eyes found me, and his voice warmed into the part of the speech they'd written for me. What my daughter found out there belongs to all of us. So tonight, I'm proud to say it's coming home into the family, with her blessing. Applause started to build. He held out his hand. Brooke, honey, come on up and say a few words. I walked up the 3 steps, calm as still water, and he handed me the microphone with the smile of a man who has already won. Thank you, Dad, I said, and that surprised him more than shouting would have. I want to tell you the truth about the old station, because it's a better story than the one you've heard. I opened the envelope. I bought it myself, with my own savings, free and clear, recorded under my name only. Here's the deed. I said it on the podium. What I found in a sealed room is a collection of bonded whiskey from the 1920s, authenticated, going to public auction in Denver next month. Here's the contract. The room had gone very quiet, the good kind, and third, the part that's actually about this family. I unfolded the last pages. My grandfather didn't buy the Howard place. He loaned a drowning man money in the Depression and took everything he had when he couldn't pay. That's where the Rutledge name started. Right there, in the room you stood in 3 weeks ago and called other people's trash. And then the room went completely silent. That's a lie, my father said, too loud, lunging half a step. Put that down. It's recorded at this county's own courthouse, I said quietly. Any of you can pull it Monday. From 3 tables back, the man in the gray suit stood. I can confirm the consignment is signed and the provenance is documented. The sale proceeds under Ms. Rutledge's name. Wade pushed to the front, his voice cracking. You think this is over? We'll have lawyers on this Monday. I bought it, I said, and I didn't raise my voice an inch. Everything I have I can show on paper. Every dollar, every signature, every date. Can you? He opened his mouth and shut it, because he and I both knew exactly what his paper looked like, going all the way back to a strip, parcel in 2019, with my initials on his lie. I didn't gloat. The wanting to was right there, hot in my throat, 33 years of it. But I'd learned what my family never did. The loud win isn't the real one. So I set the microphone back in its stand. Congratulations on the award, Dad, I said, and I meant it. You did build a lot. That part's true. Then I walked down the 3 steps, past my mother's stunned face and my brother's red one, past 200 people who had come to crown the Rutledge name and were now learning what it was poured on. Nobody clapped. Nobody booed. The quiet followed me all the way to the doors. The auction in Denver brought $1.3 million. The Sentinel ran the real story that Sunday. Dale Mercer's name quietly stopped showing up on listings. The station opened the following spring. Restored, the bonded cellar preserved behind glass with a plaque telling the true history. Howard's name first. My mother came once, alone. She stood a long time at that glass. Then she found me and said the family missed me, that I'd made my point, that surely now I could let it rest and stand with them again, that I'd chosen the door. You're right, I told her, and I smiled. I did choose the door. I just walked through a different one than you meant. Your worth was never theirs to hand you or to take back. And sometimes the very thing they call your grave is just the ground nobody else was brave enough to dig.